Welcome, Helen, to the Happier at Work podcast. I'm delighted to have you on the show today. Would you like to introduce yourself to listeners?
I would do. Lovely. Thank you. Thank you for having me, Aoife. So I'm Helen Joy of People Spark, and my business is focusing around the soft skills that managers need in order to get themselves to the peak that they can be as managers, because great managers make great teams. And when managers are particularly good at what they do, it's amazing the impact that has on the individual and therefore on the bottom line to the business as well. There's been a bit of a shift this year, like with a lot of people, and I spent a lot of time working with smaller businesses and looking a lot more around team engagement. And so it's gone from sort of making sure that the managers have the skills to supporting the managers to utilise their skills to re-engage their teams if they've been off on furlough, or if they've got mixed hybrid teams moving forward. And yeah, much more of a focus around sort of team orientation rather than just the management side now.
Yeah, but you made a very good point. Great managers make great teams. And in this new environment, it's these new skills that are required, isn't it? It's not just because you can't just deal with people face to face all the time. It's dealing with people remotely and being able to manage that. So yeah, lots of things to drill into there. So you mentioned about the specific skills that are required. Any thoughts on what skills are required or how those skills might have changed going from like mostly face-to-face interaction into this new either hybrid or like you mentioned furloughed or remote working situation?
Yeah, I think the difficulty has been for a lot of managers is that shift from being able to pick up on those non-verbal cues that people use. And if you walk into your office, you can sense when somebody's not quite themselves. You can sense when somebody's a little bit quiet, a little bit down. If they always come in and they're all cheery and smiley and they come in and they're very quiet to sit at their desk, straight away everybody knows that there's a problem. And that's gone. We've lost that. It's so much harder to get a sense of somebody this way than it is in real life. And I think we can all, even when we're feeling our most vulnerable, even when we're feeling our most sort of insecure and what have you, we can manage to do this for 15 minutes. We can be all cheerful on a call to a boss, and you can put on the front and then turn off your screen, your camera, and actually you can feel how you genuinely feel. And I think the key for me is managers learning to pick up when that person is still not quite themselves, when they're quite often they go over the top the other direction. And it's the critical thinking to be able to ask the right questions to identify exactly how somebody's feeling, and the relationship building, that it's so much more important that you communicate on a regular basis with your teams, finding that balance between micromanagement. I mean, God, some horror stories of managers insisting that their teams all have their cameras on all day and they've got them all on, gallery view so they can see everybody. I mean, that's appalling.
Yeah.
But that ability to communicate with them as people, not employees, and to communicate enough to get to know them probably much better than you did when they were just coming into the office. And in a lot of ways that's got easier because when we're having these conversations, we're in each other's houses now.
Yeah.
I've found with some of my clients from before, the relationship's completely shifted because I've been in the kitchen, I've been in their spare room. There's been times I've been talking to managers and they've gone, I'm really sorry, I've got 3 kids and a dog wandering around at the moment. And suddenly you see a different side to someone, and that person can be less intimidating than they might have been if you were sitting in their office on their on their territory. But as a manager, I think the really good stuff that comes out of this awful year is managers are having to treat their teams like individuals, like real people. And it's a different shift. It's a shift into the sort of humanity of how we are at work, which feeds into all of those basic needs that we have as individuals for feeling secure, feeling safe, and therefore being in a position to give our very best and be completely engaged with that person. Which manager are you going to go the extra mile for the one that doesn't bother making any effort with you, or the one that knows your kids' names and when their birthdays are, and cares about you and your circumstances. And I think that's a definite bonus from this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And I loved what you had to say about it's just learning how to pick up when someone's not quite feeling themselves. And there's lots of stories I've heard about just asking someone, but genuinely, like, so not like, how are you today? And someone's like, a fine or grand. But building on that and asking again and asking again to kind of no, but like, what's really going on for you? Like the fine or grand that's kind of a throwaway comment, if you like, but it's like, no, but how are you actually getting on? And I know we discussed before coming on the call about it's the role really of the senior leaders to show that level of vulnerability in an organization. And like that level of vulnerability shows it shows people that it's okay to say that it's, creates this psychologically safe environment that we were talking about, that it's okay to say, actually, things aren't going really well. I'm not having a great day. Hopefully I'll have a better day tomorrow, or, here's the steps that I'm taking. I'm doing a bit of journaling. I'm getting outside for a walk, or whatever it is, whatever steps that people will take in order to do that. So yeah, no, I think it's really important, and picking up on those things. And I'd love to kind of chat to you a little bit more about the skills of a manager in general. So you were saying about, as an individual, as an employee, who am I going to go to? Am I going to go to the manager that knows my kids' names and my dog's names and when their birthdays are, et cetera, et cetera? Or am I going to go to the manager who doesn't really ask me about myself and my what's going on in my personal life? And it's brilliant that this, one of the good things to come out of COVID is this building of individual relationships with people as people. That's a really great thing to have happened. But I suppose coming back to managers and what managers can do, or what are the key skills that managers need to have. Like for me, it's like there is one purpose of a manager, and that is to develop other people. Maybe I wasn't always aware of that, and when I was a manager, certainly like that wasn't necessarily on my radar. That's not how I was taught. It was more the kind of leadership and the, I don't want to say the command and control, but it's kind of like the taking of control and the being in control and the decision making and all of that stuff that goes with that. But I'd love to talk to you more about like, and especially when someone takes that first step into becoming a manager, what are the skills that they need to be aware of? And maybe let's have a chat about the difference between, say, and we spoke about this in the leadership series on the podcast, someone who doesn't really want to be a manager, but that's the career that's presented to them. And then we have the other people who are really, would be really, really great managers based on the skills that are required. So I probably just asked about 3 or 4 questions in one, but just to get the conversation flowing. And there's lots of stuff that we can talk about, and they're all interrelated as well.
Yeah. It is a massive. It's like a massive great bit. I've got a. It's like that, isn't it? That's an elastic band ball where everything is kind of connected into itself. It is. Everything is so interlinked, and for me, it is around. The manager traditionally is very much around. Was the person who got stuff done. So a manager's role was very much around making sure that processes were completed in the right way, making sure that everybody did their element in a process, and they did it in the right time scales, and they arrived on time, and they, if they were off sick, they did the return to work interview and those kind of things. And that has shifted so much in the last 10 or 20 years, because those are not the managers who get the best out of people. And the problem is, though, you've still got some cultures where that is the expectation of what a manager does, that is, you're not there to be friends with them, you're there to be making sure they do what they're supposed to do. And it's not about being friends with people, it's about having those respectful professional relationships. If you recruit someone to do a job, have the faith in them to actually do that job, because
Yeah.
if they don't, then you've made a mistake somewhere. You've either recruited the wrong person or you haven't trained them properly.
Yeah.
So as a manager, that's your fault. But
Mm.
your role, as you said, is to get the best out of that person for themselves. So to make sure that they are developed, whether that be on a personal skills, soft skills basis, whether it's a technical skills basis, but that's your key role. And by doing that, you make sure that they deliver what they need to do. For me, it's about communication is one of the biggest skills. And when you're a new manager, it's really easy when you become a new manager to go into that command and control place, especially if you're promoted internally in a team, because that's the hardest way to get your first foot into management. Because on Friday, you're one of the guys and you're going out for a beer. On Monday, you've got to make sure that they're delivering what they're supposed to deliver.
Mm.
And it can be really hard. And so many people go into, and I did it personally. I was terrible. The first time I managed people, I was awful, and it makes me cringe. But I learned, and I'm much better now. And it is very much around that, you're there you don't necessarily need to know the ins and outs of every single part of the job they're doing. You need to trust that they can do it, because last week when you were their colleague, they did it and they were doing it perfectly well. So it's to trust that they're going to do their bit, and you step up and understanding exactly what your new role is, and sitting down with that group of people and explaining what your new role is and how that's going to be different, and what their role is in making sure that you can do your role as well. But it's also having that empathy that some people might not necessarily settle into that easily to begin with. But then that's back to communication and having the confidence to say, if you think that this might be a problem for you, can we take that out of here and have a conversation about that and why that might be difficult, and what we can do together, not what I can do to make that right, but what can we do together to make sure that we can work well. And lots of this stuff comes under emotional intelligence, and that's one of the biggest areas for me, and still massively undervalued within organizations, because that ability to, it's not like IQ, you can change your EQ, you can change and develop your emotional intelligence levels, and the biggest and core area is that self-awareness. Because when you know the things that are going to trigger you and the things that are going to push you into reacting in a certain way, you can manage that. And then the other two parts are around your kind of relationships with others. But that self-management, self-awareness and self-management is the first area, I think, as anyone as a new manager needs to focus on, is understanding, where do I feel really confident, but also where am I going to feel insecure and I'm potentially going to react in the wrong way because of my insecurity. Because quite often emotional responses are from fear. Aggression generally comes from fear, defensiveness comes from fear. So learning to understand what's going to drive that and how to recognize that and deal with that internally makes a massive difference. And there was some research done that, I can't remember the exact figures, but they did some research. It was following on from Daniel Goleman's original work around emotional intelligence. And they identified that the top performing businesses, their leadership didn't necessarily have the highest IQs, but they had the highest emotional intelligence levels, because they were able to adapt. They were able to build stronger relationships with their teams, both internally and externally, their teams wherever they are. And as a manager, it's understanding that I was having this conversation last week with some people. As a manager, if you're part of a management team, you are part of two teams. You are part of that management team, and you're also still part of the team that you are responsible for. And it's understanding when to put which hat on. Because that can be one of the hard things. It's not just the situation you have on a day-to-day basis with your team. It's the situation you have where you're suddenly part of this other team that has to make longer term, more strategic decisions as well.
Something interesting, before we kind of drill into the emotional intelligence side of things a little bit more, something interesting that you mentioned was about having a clear understanding of the role that the manager is going to do. And to me, then that's the responsibility maybe of their manager to explain, like, this is what your new role actually entails and this is what the expectation is. Do you think, generally speaking, in your view, that companies are good at explaining what the new role is, or setting clear boundaries, or setting clear definitions for what it is that is expected of managers?
In my experience, no, unfortunately not.
Yeah,
Um,
I thought you might
and
say
that's and that's where the problem stems from. That's the issue, is
that. Yeah.
people, especially, they're very good when they bring in someone from outside,
Okay.
because they have to go through that recruitment process. Oh, I say very good, they're better. They have to go through that process of, here's a job description, especially if they're using an outside agency, because that agency will kind of push them to have something that they can give to potential candidates. And they put an awful lot more thought and time and effort into it when they're bringing a new person in than they do with their existing staff, in my experience. And my own personal experience is, right, as of Monday, you're going to be the team manager for this team of people, which basically means it's your job to make sure they do their job. Off you go.
Yeah.
And that was it. And this was in the insurance industry, which was everybody was Mr. Bean and Mr. Smith and Mr. Jones. And so it was, still steeped in 18th century processes.
And I noticed
that
no,
was
no
genuinely
Mrs. or Miss.
or oh God, no. Because there was nobody, if you're a woman, you weren't allowed to be senior. God. And it was that, just, well, you've been around it, you've had a team supervisor, so you go and you know what to do.
Yeah.
But then, yeah, off you go. And I went from being this really nice member of the team that everyone liked and we all got on really well, we had a brilliant relationship, to this demonic
Dragon.
power crazed dragon, literally in the space of a week. I look back like, oh God. And even they would look at me like, shut up, stop it, get on with it, stop chatting, get on with your work.
Yeah.
And my brain inside, I'm going, no, don't do it. Yeah. Oh, it's just so weird. But and that's the thing, it's, and whenever I'm talking to new managers, and I will always say to them, are you really, really clear as to not just the actual tactical elements of your job, but the purpose of your role?
Yeah.
Has your manager told you the purpose and the output of your role and the purpose and the output of your team? Because then quite often people don't know where their team fits into the whole process of an organisation, and who's dependent on them doing what they do, efficiently, well, to the best possible standard. Because when you've got that wider view, it really helps you inform how you get your team to perform as well.
Yeah, no, I like that. The idea of having the wider view and how your team fits in the kind of the bigger picture. What role do you play in terms of what the organization is trying to achieve and what the purpose is? And even going one step further and saying what the impact is on clients of whether or not you can successfully fulfill your role, and even down to that individual level. So by you completing XYZ in a week or in a month or whatever time it is, the impact that has on our clients is this. Our clients are now able to view the market in a different way. They're now able to, I don't know, I can't think of an example. I was trying to think of an example from an insurance company, but I couldn't think of one off the top of my head, not having that background.
I think the thing is with insurance as well, it is quite dull. Well, it was 20 odd years ago. But it's that bit of, oh my God, just realised it's 30 years ago this year. Oh my God. Anyway, you are having, wherever you are in that process, you're having an impact on a person, on their life, whether if you work in home insurance and you're part of the process that then delays whether they get an auditor out, whether they get their money paid, whether they're stuck in a hotel for longer because you're not getting your bit done, or if somebody's, I worked in the life insurance division, and if somebody dies, if you don't, you're just adding extra stress and pressure to that bereaved person by
Yeah.
not getting everything done as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
But too many businesses become too internally focused,
Yeah.
and you end up with silos
They're focusing
who
on the process,
don't
dividing
yeah,
teams, yeah, based on what they.
yeah, and almost completely forgetting that there's a customer at the end of that whole process, because it
Yeah.
all becomes about how you do things, what happens internally. And we were talking about this I did some webinars on recruitment earlier this year, and we were saying there, recruitment processes become such an internal thing, and completely forget that the customers of that recruitment process
Our
are
external.
external, and that there's a human being
Yeah.
who is being pushed through this process that you're creating to suit your internal needs. And it was sometimes when you look at it, and even for me, I was like, oh God, yeah, wow. I was in the industry for such a long time, and then this sudden realization of like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
person out there.
So it's
Not
treating,
about,
I mean, it comes back down to treating people like people, I suppose. But something interesting that you mentioned, and I want to relate this back to a book that I read recently, and this was sort of in the appendix section. It might have even been in the book, so it was like almost an afterthought. But one of the ideas around that was that within a team, you're very aware of what you need to do, or hopefully you are, and then and what your boss is trying to achieve, and you're kind of striving towards that, but maybe you're less aware of what the teams around you are trying to achieve, and having that lateral awareness of, it's important for me to do my role so that the person in another team can do their role better, or things like that. So really having that understanding, so rather than being in silos, as you mentioned, and so many organizations are in silos now, that you have more of a collective understanding of what it is that you're trying to achieve as a business, and what the impact of what you do, and just a really great understanding of the people who are equivalent to you but in another team. What's their role, what are they trying to achieve, and how can you help them by treating them like a person and helping them to get their role done.
absolutely. And I think that's even harder at the moment, because people are not even necessarily going into the building that those other people are in.
Yeah.
They're not even passing them in the corridors or in the lift, or the car park, what have you, because we've become so isolated that we are forgetting, and especially given, and it's understandable given the psychological impact of the year that we've had, and the constant being pushed into bubbles, and losing contact with so many people, and so many people have found that hard in different ways. And I think that's so important as a business, and as the leadership of a business, to starting to, and hopefully they've been thinking about this prior to December, is if we assume that our world is not going to change massively for at least the first quarter, because
Yeah.
even with the vaccine, the first vaccines in the UK were done this morning. It's still 21 days before those people are going to be considered safe. And this is only, this is not the general work population at the moment. So it's going to be April before most people get it. So actually, as a business, some real thought really should have gone into, how do we re-engage everybody in our business? How do we, and how do we cascade that down? Because certain managers have been doing a brilliant job, but they, again, it's focused very internally, and people looking, right, this is my team, I need to focus on my team and make sure my team are okay, which is admirable and fantastic. But now it's okay, my team are okay, we've got that foundation, we've got that basis, we can do this, we can continue like this. Now, how do we take that to the next level? How do we make sure that this division's okay? How do we make sure that, if you're a smaller business, and I've interestingly been doing lots more work with smaller businesses than medium businesses this year, which is a real shift for me. But how do we re-engage everybody with that purpose of the business? How do we re-engage with, if this is the way it's going to be for at least another 6 months, how do we make sure we're as strong when we do physically get back together as we were when we left? Because relationships are different, and there'll be lots of businesses that do hybrid. And that again is a whole different way of managing, because it's easy then to slip into the old habits and the old sense of teamship with the people that are physically there.
Yeah.
You've really got to make sure that not just as a team manager, but everybody is embracing that person who is that remote worker as well.
Yeah.
Because that can be a real challenge.
Yeah. And I hear a lot of people, or hear of a lot of people doing kind of a mixed approach where they'll be in the office for a few days a week and at home a few days a week, and trying to find that balance between, you know, not everyone is going to be in the office all on the same day. So when do you have that team meeting, the team catch up, and do you alternate it so that one person might be at home for the team meeting, but it's not the same person all the time, or something like that. And I've heard great stories of, you know, the future of work being that we do our best work at home where we can sit and we can be concentrated, or that might be at home, or that might be in a co-working space. And then we bring everyone together when we need that kind of camaraderie and need to work together on a project, and just need to build those relationships, that we have the human interaction, and it's a bit more of a social gathering, or a bit more of a social aspect to coming into the office, for example. Yeah, really, really interesting about like what the future will hold, especially in relation to remote working. I'd love to tie that in with the kind of going back to one of the earlier discussions around like whether, you know, should everyone be a manager, or if this is presented to you as a career opportunity. And that's how I always saw it, is you progress your career by becoming a manager. You know, you get paid more money, and you get like a better status and all of this kind of stuff. And that's sort of, in my view, how careers are typically presented, that you progress until you become a manager, and then you become a manager of managers. But I'd love to get your views on whether everyone has what it takes to be a manager, or, you know, what are the options that we can have? Is it about presenting a specialist role for someone who doesn't necessarily, you know, who's really good at the job, but doesn't really show much inclination for wanting to develop other people, and how to, I suppose, manage that as well, if they're being managed by someone who may be perceived as more junior to them?
Yeah, I really want to say that yes, everyone can be a great manager, but they need to want to be.
Yeah.
And that for me is that's the difference. And I think if you want to be a great manager and you're prepared to put the time and effort into learning the skills and applying those skills, you can be a great manager. The problem is a lot of businesses promote someone because they're great at what they do.
Yeah.
And sales is the worst in the world for doing this. They take great salespeople who are selfish, self-motivated, driven, client driven, money driven, you know, all of those things. And they see how great these people are, and they think that they can get that person to replicate themselves.
Yeah.
And it's not only that they can't, they don't want to. They don't want to get involved in other people more often than not. They want to continue to do what they're doing. And I think that's why businesses could look at having sort of two paths, where you have the managerial path for the people who want to go down that route and have the skills and you know, naturally have those skills and use those skills more often. And then you have the people who could kind of go to professional track. And there's a few law firms in the UK that are working on that basis, and they are raising the management path to be as prestigious as the professional path in terms of law. So they're getting people ILM qualified or CIM qualified, but you either go down that professional path or you go down that managerial path, because certainly within law, I wouldn't say they're mutually exclusive, but
the skills that are required for one, you wouldn't necessarily
different.
have those skills in another. Okay. Yeah.
And you hear horror stories, especially, you know, law firms particularly, of, you know, it is long hours, and the city's another place. It's long hours. It is, you know, you're barked at, you're driven, you're pushed, and that isn't necessarily the best way to get it's not necessarily, it's not the best way to get long-term results out of people.
Yeah.
But if you have someone who can do that nurturing part, you don't have to take away. Nurturing doesn't mean you take away their drive,
Yeah.
and you take away their commitment to excellence. It means you give them the safe base to go out and do that, and to make mistakes, and to learn from those mistakes. I mean, yes, someone consistently makes mistakes, you need to check whether they're in the right role, but to not actually see everything that doesn't work perfectly as a failure, because it's not. Stuff happens, and you know, it's that fail fast and move on, isn't it? You know, try something. I've learned this year, it's not about perfection. Try something. If it doesn't work, fine, try it, tweak it, do it slightly differently. The world's changing, and I think organizations, especially very traditional organizations, need to change along with it as well.
Yeah. It comes back to what we were talking about earlier in relation to creating a psychologically safe environment, and I think that's really important. And I, you know, kind of tying in slightly with that, I'd love to talk more about what we were saying earlier about emotional intelligence, and how self-awareness and self-management are two of the really critical skills of being an effective manager. Now, for me, I would say 100% agree. Self-awareness, self-management is maybe something I've thought less about, but I can see how that's really, really important as well. So it's one thing to be aware of your own emotions, your triggers, and how you treat other people, and the impact that your behavior has on others. But it's another thing to take that into consideration and manage it. So you might know that by barking at someone, it's going to cause an issue or a rift or something, but it's another thing to manage yourself because you know that. But no, I think those two are really, really important. So I'd love to get your thoughts on how, I suppose, people can become more self-aware and to manage themselves better.
And it is that self-awareness is that first stage, and lots of people are shifting that way. There seems to be a lot more people are aware that, you know when I under a lot of pressure, I get quite barky with my orders, and I get quite, right, just do it, just don't question it, just do it.
Yeah.
And I know that, and that's the self-awareness. And I've had people that have worked for me where I've kind of sat down and said to them, look, I'm really sorry, this is when I'm really stressed, this is what's going to happen, and let's just, be aware, it's not about you, it's not personal, don't take it. And so, yeah, that's the self-awareness. Now, me explaining it to that person doesn't make it feel any less comfortable at the time, just because they know that that's just what happens when I'm under pressure. The self-management is the hard bit, because that is me, before those words start to come out of my mouth, putting those little processes into place to go, right, you naturally want to just shout at them to get this done like that. Don't. Right, how else? And it's me investigating what's going to satisfy my need for control in those circumstances, because that's what it is, but is also going to not be unpleasant for other people. And it's that part, and I think it's reading. There's some fantastic ones. I mean, Daniel Goleman wrote the seminal books on this. For me, because he's an academic, I personally find them quite hard to read. They're very, very intense, and I'm not an academic by any stretch of the imagination. There's another book called Emotional Intelligence 2.0, which is, I think it's Dr. Travis Bradbury, and that revolutionized it for me, because that book made it so easy to understand and so easy to adopt. And when you buy the book, you also get a free EQ questionnaire, so EQ, that emotional intelligence part, and they let you do this free thing, and then you can go through and you can pick, so you can use it as a workbook to go, right, I got 86 on self-management, but I got 88 on self-awareness, so I'm reasonably self-aware, but the self-management, that's the bit that I need to focus on first, because I am reasonably aware, but I need to work on how I allow that to leak out when I'm stressed, because the best managers are the ones who, they're like the swans and they keep calm. Doesn't mean that they don't ever admit that they are a bit nervous, a bit scared, a bit anxious, a bit insecure, a bit vulnerable, any of those things, but they do it in such a way that it lands with that other person in a way that makes them comfortable, in a
Yeah.
way that allows them to continue to be their best, because that comes back to, as a manager, your role is to
Yeah.
get the best out of your team,
I was going to
for
say,
them, it's to help them be their best.
yeah. And by barking orders or by being stressed or visibly under pressure, that doesn't bring out the best in other people. And it's about shifting that focus to, what can I do as a manager? It's not about you anymore. It's about the people who you serve, because essentially it's, they don't work for you, you work for them. You work to help them to get the best, to be the best that they can be. It's a really, really nice approach.
It is, as a manager, it's your job is to make sure that your team have everything they need to grow and develop and to be their best and to do the best job they can. And that can be the physical, so it can be the stuff down to your laptop, your stapler, whatever, but it's also the emotional side of that as well. You have got to create the environment that allows them to be human, because if you don't allow them to be human, with all our frailties and all our mistakes and all the things that make us what we are, because when they are human at work, that's when their engagement levels go through the roof, because they want to do things for you. They want to do the best for the business. If I'm listening to, I always listen to an audiobook when I walk the dog. And at the moment, I'm still listening to Leaders Eat Last by Simon Sinek. And I was saying the other day, there's nothing massively revolutionary in there at all. It's very much sort of stuff that I believe in anyway. But it's just, for me, it's that it just reinforces my beliefs that the best managers are the ones that are the leaders. They're not, they're managers in their title, but they're leaders, because what they're doing is saying, this is where we're going. This is how we're going to get there. Here's everything you need. Come with me. And everyone goes, yeah, brilliant, we're on board. And that's a rarity, but it's a possibility. And everyone who wants to can find their way to that. It's just sometimes people need guidance to understand how they need to change to get to that.
Yeah. And it's manager as leader, essentially, and showing people and being someone who other people want to follow. We really like that approach. I haven't read Leaders Eat Last yet, so I'll have to, it's on my list.
Yeah, nothing revolutionary, but
wouldn't
very,
be
very reinforcing.
Yeah, well, that's it exactly. And I loved what you had to say about like being human at work. And that's my entire philosophy, is about being able to be yourself, be authentic, and say that you're struggling. If you're struggling, treat other people like they're like, treat other people. I was going to say like you like to be treated, but I recently heard about the golden rule versus the platinum rule. So now I'm like, so the golden rule is treat other people like you want to be treated, and the platinum rule is treat other people how they would like to be treated. It's
I think
an environment.
Absolutely. And it is that, and the only way you can do that is by understanding them as individuals, and by understanding what motivates them, what drives them, what scares them, where their boundaries are, where they want to be stretched, where they want to be challenged, where they absolutely don't want to be challenged, and when you get that, and when you have that understanding of people, the stuff that you can create, and the lengths that you can go to, and where you can get to as a group, because a team isn't just 1 + 1 + 1, it's 1 + 1 + 1, it's infinite. The possibilities, when people are comfortable and confident to say whatever they feel, because the best ideas are the ones sometimes that come out of the most bizarre ideas, especially when if you're doing a group chat, and somebody goes, well, what about this? And you go, what? But then somebody else will go, well, okay, yeah, that's a bit weird and a bit wild, but what about this? We could do this. And then you get that whole, whereas if you're going to say, well, what about this? And everyone just goes, oh, that's stupid. You're not going to do that next time, are you? And it is around, for me as a manager, your job is to create that environment, is to create.
There's no stupid ideas, that people can feel free to say what they want without any sort of retribution. And like you say, because when someone gives an idea, then that might spark an idea in someone else. Like it might be wild and wacky, but it sparks an idea in someone else. We focus very much on the kind of emotional intelligence side of things and the role of manager and the importance of managers. And I suppose it's worth highlighting. Like, I'm kind of a bit like, how true is this? That people leave managers, they don't leave companies, and like there's differing stats around whether that's actually the case or not. But I suppose it's about underlining the importance of the role of a manager. I think it's really, really important in an organization, and it's not something that's going to go away anytime soon. Someone who's able to get the best out of other people, I think, is crucially important. Any kind of final thoughts around that, or any of the other skills that are required in addition to communication, emotional intelligence?
I think the ability to be flexible and adaptable, and the ability to manage through change are massive for managers. And I think those are the things that help people want to stay with a particular manager. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because you can make statistics do whatever you want. You can get them to give you whatever result you want. If you're going in there with a kind of, if you want to engineer it, you can engineer it in that direction. But a great manager won't necessarily keep you in a toxic company. But a toxic manager can be responsible for you leaving an amazing company. But you don't get that many amazing companies that have toxic managers in them, because they're amazing generally because they create and those people are weeded out rather than moved sideways, which is my absolute pet hate. Oh, this person's terrible and everyone's complaining and everyone's leaving, so let's just put them over here. Why don't we just deal with it? They might not know they're a terrible manager. That's the other part. Depends on it is, but that ability to flex and adapt and listen and understand and think really critically about things. And one of the biggest things, all the great leaders and everybody who I've ever worked with who's been great has always been, don't bring me a problem, bring me a solution. I know that's like such a cheesy line, but what is phenomenal about that is, by saying that, what they're doing is they're helping you grow anyway. They are helping you work out a solution to a problem yourself, and they're just there to go, give it a go. The best ones will say, give it a go, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't matter. There's virtually 90% of things can be undone. They might ask questions, if they might ask some very, very good questions around, okay, well, what might the output of that be? But if you can think things through and you can actually have a good response with that, and you've thought about the impact on other people and on the customer and different processes and things, stuff sometimes is going to go wrong, and that ability to be adaptable and let people try, but also to ask the right questions to make sure that they've thought through all the different elements, which is fundamentally coaching, isn't it? So that's another underlying skill of good managers, the ability to coach rather than tell.
I 100% agree with that. I think that's nearly, that's one of the really important skills, I think, is to be able to coach people. So asking questions rather than telling them what to do, and that helps facilitate, their satisfaction of their needs for autonomy, figuring stuff out for themselves. And I know certainly when I was coached by one of my managers early on, I just felt so empowered that I felt like I had come up with the entire thing myself. When she coached me through the process, but I was like coming up with all of the solutions. It just felt so great. And she, to this day, I still regard her as one of the best managers that I've had. Absolutely. Yeah. Anyway, Helen, we could probably chat all day about all of this stuff. I'd love to know, what makes you happier at work?
The people. For me, it's the relationships and the people, because you can do what you do pretty much, in a lot of places, if you've got the right team around you, no matter what position they're in. The relationships and because those relationships make it fun.
Yeah.
I've had jobs, and you know, as a consultant, I've worked in businesses where I've actually come home sometimes and thought, I got paid for that.
Yeah.
I've just had an absolute ball. We've just had such a great day, and I get paid for it. How amazing is that? And that to me is it's always about the people, having the right people around you who are working to that same goal.
Yeah.
Is nothing beats that.
Yeah, brilliant. I love it. And if people want to find out more about you, if they want to understand more about, I know you have this great PDF about the skills in particular that managers need to have, what is the best way that people can reach you?
LinkedIn. I am on LinkedIn most days. I don't always post, but I'll make sure I engage with everybody at least every day. Or my website, which is www.people-spark.co.uk. Or drop me an email, which is just helen@people-spark.co.uk, or give me a call. My phone number is on LinkedIn.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time today. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. Really, you know, love getting into all of the insights about what can drive happier workplaces. And I think managers are really key to that.
They absolutely are. Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.